What if the voice you're about to dismiss as your imagination is actually a message from beyond the grave? That question ignited a firestorm in 1848, when two unsuspecting teenage sisters in Rochester, New York, Annie and Maggie Fox, leaned into a challenge and heard three distinct raps in answer. No stage, no tricks, just a simple question and a startling response that spread through parlors, scientific societies and newspapers alike. Suddenly, the idea that consciousness might stretch beyond our mortal coil wasn't relegated to faded texts or whispered legends. It demanded attention. Today we stand at the same threshold. Beneath the hum of everyday life, there's a subtle pulse that refuses to be silenced. It beckons us to wonder, could our world be threaded together with an invisible realm of voices and presences? Think about the last time you felt a chill in an empty room, or heard your name in a crowded space where no one spoke. Dismissed, perhaps. But what if those moments are echoes of something more? We're not here for cheap thrills or fluff. We're here to peel back the layers of skepticism and superstition, guided by stories that straddle the line between science and the inexplicable. We'll trace how those first raps in Rochester cracked open Victorian society's obsession with spirit contact, and how that fascination has evolved into the sophisticated tools and rituals practiced today. But make no mistake, this isn't about revealing every secret on day one. Some doors stay half-closed for a reason. The power of spirit communication lies in that pregnant pause, the instant before you dare to ask, and the hush that follows. In the next chapter, we'll journey into the buried ceremonies of long-lost cultures, uncovering why their rites were hidden or destroyed. For now, hold on to your questions. Keep that spark of doubt alive, because the real truth doesn't shout, it whispers, and it waits for those brave enough to listen. They called it heresy, witchcraft, even devil's work. But for centuries, desperate souls turned to those forbidden rites when hope faded. In the 12th century Chronicle of Melisande, there's a passage so startling it was scrubbed from later copies. A band of Crusaders, huddled in a moonlit camp beneath the walls of Jerusalem, summoned the voice of a fallen comrade. They chanted in a half-forgotten dialect, drawing a circle of salt on the dusty ground. A wind rose from nowhere, snuffing out their torches, and a disembodied voice spoke, naming the man they thought was dead. Some say it warned of treachery, others claim it simply whispered his final words of love. Within weeks, the church had outlawed any attempt to bridge life and death, branding the ritual dark and dangerous. Yet the knowledge refused to die. Across distant deserts and hidden mountain valleys, fragments of that ceremony survived, buried in scrolls, painted on cave walls, or kept alive by oral tradition. In North Africa, Sufi mystics used a variation of the salt circle and sacred invocation to seek guidance from departed saints. In the Scottish Highlands, seers practiced call and response, using bone whistles carved with runes to coax faint replies from beyond. Each culture adapted the core idea: establish a boundary, open a channel, then listen with every fiber of your being. Why were these rituals hidden? Part of it was fear. When voices from the other side spoke, whether bearing comfort or calamity, ordinary people felt powerless. Kings and clerics craved control over life, death, and the flow of information. Any technique that whispered secrets untold threatened their authority. So libraries burned and teachers went into hiding. Horrified scribes altered manuscripts. Inquisitors hunted down those who dared to remember. Yet a spark of defiance flickered in dimly lit rooms, passed hand to hand in hushed tones. By the time Victorian parlors lit their candles for séance tables, they were rediscovering echoes of those ancient rites, without realizing it. The Fox sisters tapped into a well of human tradition older than Europe itself. Their knocks weren't novelty. They were the latest tremor in a quake that began in dark Egyptian tombs, where priests inscribed questions on papyrus and left them in the coffins of pharaohs. Across Asia, Tibetan lamas chanted to the bardo, the transitional realm, coaxing messages from souls in limbo. Even today, a handful of secret societies in Rome and Cairo keep guarded manuscripts describing the exact words, gestures, and timing required to breach the veil. And yet, for every story of success, there's a shiver of caution. Chronicles speak of necromancers in medieval Sicily whose summoned spirits demanded tribute, promising insight into hidden treasure, only to lure the living into madness. In Central America, Spanish friars recorded indigenous ceremonies meant to honor ancestors. The conquerors called them pagan abominations and destroyed the codices. What survived was often misinterpreted, reduced to caricature or superstition. Modern practitioners, armed with half-decoded texts, sometimes follow rituals that can't deliver what centuries-old masters intended. That's why we owe it to ourselves to look beyond the sensational. These rituals were never simple parlor tricks. They required precise timing, invocations whispered at the crossroads hour, inks mixed under specific lunar phases, and tools consecrated by lineage. They were built on a philosophy that saw consciousness as a strand woven into the fabric of reality, rather than a spark confined to the brain. To practice them today without that context is to wander blind into a labyrinth of symbols and silence. Still, the buried wisdom offers something powerful, a reminder that we are part of a continuum. Long before laboratories measured brainwaves, our ancestors believed death was a doorway, not a wall. They understood that unanswered questions can echo across centuries, and that some answers come only when we dare to speak them aloud. When you prepare to call the unseen, you step into a conversation begun long ago, in Damascus, in Alexandria, in the ancient workshops where scrolls were copied by candlelight. So ask yourself, which fragments will you follow? Will you trace the salt circle to its Greek origins or seek the bone whistle in Highland folklore? Will you dismiss these rituals as superstition, or honor the voices that survived centuries of erasure? In the next chapter, we'll turn from myth and legend to the tools of modern inquiry: EVP recorders, EMF meters, and brainwave sensors, asking whether science can illuminate what faith and fear have long obscured. But before we leave these hidden rites behind, remember this: every session you undertake is an act of remembrance. With each whispered chant, you revive a truth that history tried to bury, a truth that still waits for those who listen. They say the quietest rooms hold the loudest truths. In 2023, Dr. Evelyn Pagliari set out to test that idea in the abandoned corridors of Ashbourne Asylum, a place where the walls seem to remember every anguished cry. Armed with a high-sensitivity EVP recorder and a notebook full of careful questions, she stepped beneath the peeling paint and broken windows, determined to see whether science could capture what tradition claimed was real. She began at the old nurses' station, where decades ago patients slipped in and out of consciousness, their voices trapped between logic and delirium. With her recorder perched on the scarred wood, Evelyn asked, "Is there anyone here who wants to speak?" Then she waited, her breath fogging the chill air. The asylum answered with silence so complete it felt alive. Undeterred, she moved deeper, pausing in the children's wing. Here, tiny beds still lined the walls, each one a silent testimony to lost innocence. Evelyn flipped on her recorder, then began a softer line of questioning. "Can you tell me your name?" Over 15 minutes of empty hiss, nothing stirred, until she reached the pitch-dark laundry room. Almost by accident, Evelyn switched from questions about identity to personal trivia. "Is my childhood nickname Eddie?" It was a name only her family used, never published in any of her reports or social media profiles. She didn't expect an answer. Instead, through the static came a faint voice, hesitant yet distinct. "Edie." Evelyn froze, her hand trembling over the stop button. Later, back in her lab, she isolated that clip. The waveform showed a clear response, 2 syllables perfectly aligned with her question. She scrubbed and re-scrubbed the file for echoes, ambient noise, anything that might explain the sound. Nothing added up. To the naked ear, it was a whisper from somewhere beyond her microphone, beyond the asylum's crumbling walls, and perhaps beyond this world itself. Evelyn's findings sparked heated debate. Skeptics pointed to radio interference or pareidolia, our brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in randomness. But her colleagues who'd spent nights in the field nodded knowingly. They had heard unexplained knocks, felt sudden temperature drops, sensed presences that no instrument could fully quantify. Science, they argued, was simply catching up to what human experience had long hinted at. At its core, this tension presses on a deeper question. What is consciousness, really? If thoughts are nothing more than electrical impulses in the brain, how could they echo in an empty asylum, answering questions they've never heard? Materialists insist that every phenomenon can be reduced to chemistry and physics. Yet EVP experiments, brainwave studies during so-called ghost hunts, and even functional MRI scans of mediums in trance challenge that neat narrative. In one study, experienced psychics showed unusual patterns of neural activity when they claimed to receive messages, patterns that didn't match any known function of speech or memory. Imagine for a moment your own mind, rippling with thoughts and sensations. Now picture that energy streaming outward, like a pebble creating expanding rings on a pond. Could those ripples touch another shore? Another consciousness waiting beyond our sensory horizon? For centuries, shamans, mediums, and mystics have said yes. Their methods weren't always elegant by modern standards. Drumming in Siberia, candle rituals in colonial Massachusetts, trance-inducing dance in West Africa. But they all shared one confidence, that the mind isn't confined to skull and skin. Back at Ashbourne, Evelyn's EVP clip became more than data. It was a spark of possibility. She played it for Dr. Hideo Nakamura, a neuroscientist who'd spent years mapping brain activity linked to perception. He listened through noise-cancelling headphones, eyes widening when the voice emerged. If this isn't interference, he said, then our models of consciousness need an upgrade. That upgrade, he proposed, might begin by embracing a frontier where science and mysticism converge, where the whispered syllable eddy becomes evidence of a larger tapestry. But the story isn't complete. For every EVP that teases, dozens more remain stubbornly silent. Some sessions end with nothing but creeping dread. Others yield fleeting fragments so faint you wonder if you imagined them. And then there are the accounts that break the rules of audio capture altogether. Stories of people who hear clear voices in empty rooms, or feel a hand brush their shoulder when no one is there. Such experiences defy the neat categories of science, plunging us into questions of perception, memory, and belief. Perhaps that's the real lesson. Spirit communication isn't a simple yes or no question. It thrives in the grey zones where skepticism meets wonder. It calls us to examine not just the evidence, but the way we interpret experience. Are we too eager to dismiss the uncanny as trickery, or too quick to embrace any shadow as supernatural? In that balance lies the path forward, one that honors rigorous inquiry without losing the mystery that drew us here in the first place. As you consider Dr. Pagliari's haunting recording, ask yourself, what would convince you that voices from beyond aren't a figment of hope or fear, but something genuine waiting to be heard? And if science can only capture a whisper, how do we give that whisper room to speak? In our next chapter, we'll step even deeper into that question. When spirits do speak, what are they trying to tell us? We'll share a real family's chilling account of sudden warnings and uncanny knowledge, moments that turned curiosity into urgent revelation. But for now, let the static fade and the silence settle. The truth often speaks in the spaces between sound. They woke to a whisper before dawn, so soft it slipped past their ears like a dream. The Thompson family lived in a quiet suburb, where the loudest sound was usually the morning paper thudding on the porch. But that Saturday, Mrs. Thompson insisted she heard her late mother's voice clear as day, urging her to check the east wing. At first, the rest of the family laughed it off. Her mother had a knack for dramatics even in life. Yet when Mr. Thompson opened the front door, he found scorch marks curling beneath the weathered siding on the east side of the house. Her routine inspection by the fire department confirmed what the Thompsons feared. A short circuit had sparked smouldering embers behind the walls. Had Mrs. Thompson's mother spoken through the static of memory, or was this the product of accident and coincidence? The family would never agree on the mechanism, but everyone remembered the moment as if it were etched in their bones. The hush before the storm, the tremor of realization, the frantic scramble to prevent disaster. Stories like the Thompsons aren't novelties. They're threads in a tapestry woven from human longing, fear, and hope. Across cultures and centuries, people have reported similar warnings. A grandparent's voice guiding a lost traveler back to the path, a childhood friend's laughter echoing through an empty attic, a loved one's final words delivered with uncanny precision. In each case, the message mattered, and often it saved lives. But not every communication bears benevolence. Some voices bear warnings of a darker sort, omens of betrayal, illness, or sorrow. In one documented séance from the 1920s, a medium channeled a man who claimed he would return from the deepest shadow. 2 days later, a ship he'd boarded disappeared without a trace. Was the medium's utterance a prophecy, an accident of imagination, or a haunting trick of memory? We may never know. What we can examine, however, are the patterns that emerge when we strip away sensational headlines. First, the content often reflects the seeker's deepest anxieties or desires. A parent worried about their child's safety might hear a protective voice. A patient on the brink of recovery might receive words of encouragement. This overlap between expectation and experience fuels skeptics' claims of wishful thinking or cold reading. Yet dismissing every account as projection overlooks moments when the message transcends personal biases, when it contains details the seeker couldn't have known. Take the Thompson story again. Mrs. Thompson's mother had never owned a home of her own, let alone one with an east wing. The directive to check that specific part of the house had no precedent in her family's shared memories, and yet, when the Thompsons followed that guidance, they discovered the fire hazard mere hours before it could erupt into flames. Logic struggles to explain such precision, unless one is willing to consider that the veil between worlds can, on occasion, thin enough for genuine guidance to slip through. Second, the medium or the method often shapes the message's clarity. Automatic writing sessions yield messy, fragmented phrases. Spirit box recordings crackle with overlapping syllables. Trance mediums deliver longer narratives, but sometimes contradict themselves. Each medium acts like a lens, coloring and refracting the raw material of the spirit's intent. In the Thompsons' case, it was an unfiltered memory, a voice carried in the familiar cadence of a mother's love, untouched by technology or theatricality. Finally, we must confront the role of perception itself. Our minds strive for coherence. We splice together half-heard hints and fill in the blanks with pattern-seeking fervor. That means a stray gust of wind can become a message, a distant car horn, a proclamation from beyond. But when multiple witnesses report the same uncanny detail, or when the message aligns with independent facts like the Thompsons' fire hazard, skepticism softens, if only for a moment. What are spirits trying to tell us then? Sometimes they offer comfort, a reminder that love doesn't fade with breath. Other times they deliver cautionary counsel, a warning eroded by time but still vital if heeded. They may reveal hidden truths about ourselves, unspoken guilt or buried hopes. And sometimes, perhaps most unsettlingly, they reflect back our own projections, challenging us to discern between genuine presence and the whispering echoes of our own psyche. In that space between interpretation and fact lies the true mystery. It is there that we learn to hold complexity, to honor the stories that defy neat explanations without surrendering our rational minds. When you listen for voices from beyond, you step onto a tightrope stretched between science and superstition, belief and doubt. The question becomes not just, are these voices real, but what do they mean and how do we respond? Before we close this chapter, imagine standing in the Thompsons' foyer just after dawn, the sky bleeding pink through the curtains, your pulse still thrumming from last night's revelation. You know something happened here, something that didn't belong to your everyday understanding of reality. In that charged moment, you face a choice: to label it coincidence and move on, or to lean in and explore what it might herald. Lean in, listen closely, because in our next exploration we'll unravel the tools, both ancient and modern, that seekers have used to frame those whispers into coherent messages. From Ouija boards and crystal pendulums to spirit boxes and smartphone apps, we'll examine how these conduits shape what we hear, and how you can approach them with wisdom and discernment. But for now, carry with you the Thompsons' question. When a voice from beyond speaks, will you recognize its message, and will you dare to act? Have you ever wondered whether the tools of spirit communication unlock a hidden door, or simply hold up a mirror to your own mind? For centuries, seekers have turned to everything from carved wooden boards to polished glass, believing these objects could capture voices from the other side. But before you grab a Ouija board or fire up a spirit box app, let's explore what these conduits really do, and how their power lies as much in your intent as in any mystical design. Aleister Crowley, the infamous occultist, once set up an ornate mirror in his Cairo apartment in 1904. He lit incense, drew sigils in the dust, and stared into the glass for hours, eyes watering in the flickering lamplight. According to Crowley's diary, a voice emerged, soft at first, then insistent, spelling out cryptic verses in a language he barely recognized. Was it a genuine communication, or the product of his own intense expectations and altered state? Crowley believed he'd touched another realm. Skeptics called it self-hypnosis amplified by candle smoke. That ambiguity lies at the heart of every tool we use. A Ouija board, with its alphabet of printed letters and movable planchette, feels like a two-dimensional radio dial tuning into unseen frequencies. Yet the moment you place your fingers on that small triangle, your muscles take over in ways you don't consciously realize. Psychologists call it the ideomotor effect, your brain guiding the planchette without your awareness. But if the board guides you to a message of comfort or warning, does it matter whether the source was your subconscious or an external presence? Then there's the spirit box, an electronic device that cycles through radio channels at lightning speed, letting fragments of speech slip through the static. Users swear they hear clear responses to their questions. Are you here? Yes. Do you mean me harm? No. In a world where chance noise collides with our instinct to find meaning, these snippets can feel startlingly precise. Yet the same principle applies. Our brains are wired to impose coherence on randomness. Still, many report experiences so vivid, voices arguing, laughing, crying, that they can't be shrugged off as mere auditory pareidolia. Crystal pendulums, too, have a storied history. A simple weight on a string, held aloft over a chart of symbols, becomes a divination tool. The pendulum swings toward yes or no, or traces letters as it spells out messages. Here again, tiny muscle movements steer the crystal, yet practitioners describe moments when the pendulum's motion seems to obey a force beyond themselves. The boundary between inner impulse and outside influence blurs. What all these methods share is a framework. Set an intention, create a ritualized space, and use an object to focus your mind. In that focused state, you become highly attuned to your own thoughts, to subtle cues in the environment, to whatever might want to reach you. The tool itself is neither good nor bad. It's a catalyst amplifying whatever energy, psychic, emotional, spiritual, is present. So how do you avoid the pitfalls? First, remember that clarity of purpose outweighs novelty of gadget. Crowley's mirror ritual meant nothing without his unwavering will and knowledge of ceremonial magic. Similarly, flipping through radio channels or scribbling letters on a board will only amplify the noise in your own psyche if you haven't grounded yourself with clear questions and protective intention. Second, be aware of confirmation bias. If you desperately want to connect with a lost loved one, you're far more likely to interpret every hiss or planchette drift as their voice. Genuine communication, if it occurs, often feels dispassionate, matter-of-fact. A spirit delivering news of fire in the East Wing isn't sugarcoating anything. Lastly, treat these tools with respect. They're not party novelties or dares for thrill-seekers. In Aleister Crowley's follow-up notes, he recorded weeks of unsettling dreams and creeping paranoia, consequences he attributed to negligent ritual practice. Whether or not you accept his interpretation, the lesson stands. When you open a channel, any channel, you invite forces into your space. Cleanse your area, set boundaries with a clear closing ritual, and honor whatever you experience. In the end, the question isn't which tool is the most real, but how willing you are to look within and beyond simultaneously. The planchette, the radio static, the swinging crystal, they all point you back to yourself, your fears, hopes, skepticisms, and faith. Use them wisely, and they may guide you to insights that transcend ordinary perception. Use them carelessly, and you risk getting lost in the shadows of your own mind. As you contemplate which conduit to choose, ask yourself, what are you truly seeking? Answers, comfort, proof, or transformation? And are you prepared to handle whatever voice, real or imagined, might respond? In our final chapter, we'll lay down the golden rules you need before you summon, guidelines born of wisdom and warning, to help you tread lightly on this ancient path. The air grows still as you close your last session, the candles guttering low. You feel as if you've touched something ancient. But before you let curiosity carry you any further, remember this. Every ritual you perform is a promise. You're not just asking questions, you're opening a door. And some doors, once ajar, won't stay shut by wishful thinking alone. Take the story of Clara, a curious novice who scoffed at old superstitions and skipped the closing invocation after her first séance. She felt exhilarated. Nothing had happened but her own racing heart. So she repeated the ritual nightly, each time leaving her altar of salt and iron filings untouched afterward. At first, she chalked the strange sounds in her apartment to plumbing or passing cars. Then, one evening, she awoke to the unmistakable echo of footsteps pacing her living room. No cars rumbled, no pipes vibrated. The footsteps circled from wall to wall for hours, stopping only when Clara, trembling, finally recited a hurried prayer she'd read online. The trembling ceased, but Clara never again approached the spirit world so lightly. That experience teaches the first golden rule. Honor the pact you make with the unseen. If you beckon voices, speak your intention clearly out loud. Let your words mark the beginning and the end of the conversation. They whispered thank you and a firm goodbye matter, just as much as the invitation itself. Next, guard your space. Ancient practitioners understood that houses, woods, and temples each carry their own energies, some welcoming, some hostile. Before you summon a whisper, cleanse your room with incense, salt, or sound. Feel the difference as the air brightens, the oppressive weight lifting from the corners. Then draw your circle of protection. It can be as simple as imagining a halo of light around you, or physically marking a boundary with chalk. This barrier isn't superstition. It's a psychological anchor, reminding you that while you're curious, you remain in control. But perhaps the most vital rule is this. Set your questions with precision, not desperation. Spirits, if they answer, don't dance for drama. They respond to focused intent. Do you want guidance on a difficult choice? Ask plainly. Do you seek closure with a lost loved one? Frame your words with respect. Vague, grandiose demands. Show me the future, or reveal all your secrets. Invite confusion, distortion, or silence. It's why seasoned mediums keep journals, cataloging every nuance of each session, time, mood, temperature, even the alignment of the moon. And when it comes to tools, boards, boxes, pendulums, remember they're catalysts, not oracles. The pseudoscientific hum of a spirit box may spark a word here or there, but it won't hold your hand. Likewise, a Ouija board may trace the letters of an answer, yet those same letters could spring from your own muscle memory. Respect the difference between instrument and interpreter. Stay grounded in your body, aware of how fear and hope bend perception. Finally, cultivate a humble heart. True spirit work demands more than technique. It calls for compassion. If a voice speaks sorrow or regret, listen without judgment. If it offers caution, heed its warning. But if the message turns dark, threatening, manipulative, or spiteful, close the ritual immediately. No insight is worth sacrificing your peace of mind. When you've followed these steps, clear invocation, protected space, precise question, mindful use of tools, and humble reception, you give yourself the best chance of meaningful contact. And even then, remember, silence can speak as loudly as any rap or whisper. Sometimes the absence of a response is the message itself. So before you light the candle tonight, ask yourself, am I ready to hold the weight of what I might hear? Am I willing to honor the pact, safeguard my space, and face truths that challenge my comfort? Spirit communication isn't a game of curiosity. It's a mirror held to your soul and a doorway into realms you barely understand. Treat it with the reverence it deserves, and you may find wisdom waiting on the other side. Now it's your turn. Have you ever felt a presence in the stillness? What questions would you ask if the spirits truly answered? Share your thoughts below and let's continue this journey, together and with open hearts.